today's video, I demonstrate how 3 small changes remarkably improve how I do pen and ink background, and you can too by using my tips. If you're like me, you spend your time on the main subject, and that leaves the background treatment as more of an afterthought. I learned that we can improve a drawing so dramatically just by having a great background. It's almost cheating. When I started with pen and ink, I drew birds, and they were all staring into white space. By doing master studies and growing confidence in my technique, I slowly introduced backgrounds to my illustrations. Some were tentative, some were effective, and some not so much. I did plan my projects, but focused only on the main subject. A background that's not effective can create problems. Weird proportions, it can make the subject look flat, it can be distracting and compete for attention, and just be visually chaotic. The solution to all this is to plan holistically. So the first change I made was a mindset shift, meaning mentally prepare to invest the time it takes to plan and execute a remarkable background. All the bad backgrounds, they stem from one issue: impatience. The second change I made was the opposite of chaos and what the masters do so well. It's called a values arrangement. Here's how Arthur Gutpill suggests that we plan our backgrounds. On page 243 of his book, we see 4 options. This helps determine how to arrange the values for emphasis of the subject. You can use this guideline whether you're starting a new project from scratch. It's also helpful for a situation like we're in today. We have a phoenix staring out into white space. If you've done the phoenix tutorial with me, then you'll also have that drawing in your possession and ready to go for this exercise. In the first combination of contrasting tones, the thumbnail shows a white spot against a black background. It shows up so plainly that the eye goes directly to it. To demonstrate how this arrangement looks in an illustration, Gutpill drew a white house in a strong sunlight against a background of dark trees, and it's framed by gray tones. The other example by Franklin Booth, the eye is drawn to the white rocks against the black water framed by gray tones. Now these images are deliberately small on the screen because I want your attention on the arrangement of values and not on the details of these beautiful renderings. Next is the reverse. As an example, Gutpill rendered a dark building silhouetted against a white sky surrounded by gray. And illustrated by Yuki Shimizu is a great example of this silhouetted subject against white surrounded by gray. It's so amazing that it still reads well at this mini size. Next, we have a strong center of interest in lighter tones against a dark fading to gray. In this Booth illustration, the white path grabs center attention, then leads your eye to the 2 figures that are textured in the darkest tones fading to grays. Then we reverse the contrast from the previous example. Gutpill drew an image with a dark center surrounded by white framed by gray. And here's a of a dark sled in a snowy white center framed by gray corners. Along the same idea, here's this Booth image that I think is the closest representation of the contrasting method that I'd like to use on our phoenix. So you guessed it, we're going to do some thumbnail tests to investigate the best arrangement of values for our subject. The silhouette option isn't a good match, so we can eliminate that one right away. After having tried the other 3 approaches, I found that either of these 2 value arrangements could work. The phoenix is not really all white or all dark, somewhere in the middle. It's rendered with a large size nib and all the lines are bold, which makes the subject appear in the mid-tone range. Really, the closest match is a dark center surrounded by white with gray corners. But we need more information to proceed. What is actually going in the background? Because it's a bird in flight, it's fitting to have clouds for the white surrounding the subject, then a sky that will fade to gray corners. For the bottom half, I found some castles on Pixabay, and I'll use the leafy treetops as reference for the landscape as well. Based on these references, I did another sketch to confirm that the background I envisioned actually works with the dimensions that we're working with, so that we don't end up with weird proportions. If you're wondering why bother with another sketch, why not save time by drawing the elements directly on the Phoenix artwork, that's because this is a high quality bristle paper for inking. You want to avoid avoid having excess graphite residue on the surface, dents from the lead, or bald spots from the constant erasing. All of this can interfere with the accuracy of your ink application, and that can be frustrating. Now, I said there were 3 changes that I made for remarkable backgrounds, and that takes us to textures. I'm not talking about having pattern variety using different textures. That is important, but what will take textures to a whole other level in the background is applying the values arrangement. What I mean is fading the textures from dark to light or white to black. If you've never done one, I recommend doing a values chart. And here, I had already started one in our previous video. Now it's just a matter of practicing the textures that we want to have on our Phoenix background. With the planning phase complete, I've gone ahead drawing the elements for the background using an H lead on our inking surface. This is a hard lead and it creates a lighter line. I'm mapping out where the textures will go, indicating line directions, plane changes. I'll be relying on the previous exercises and sketches as a guideline because we don't want to draw in every detail. Again, I'm aiming to keep this surface tidy. I'm adding a border with an 05 pigment liner. If you're a hardcore inker, you'd probably prefer to use a ruling pen. I lack the practice to control that instrument, so a pigment liner feels like a safer option. Lastly, you can add a few pencil guidelines for the sky line work that will sit behind the clouds. If you have several nibs to choose from, do a test first. If you're using pigment liners, use no thicker than an 03. In the forefront of the picture plane, I start inking the clusters that represent the top of leafy trees. I'm right-handed, inking from left to right of the picture plane to avoid smudging. I'm filling in clusters with a texture to simulate leaves in the direction that leaves would grow from a branch. Each cluster fades as it follows the form based on the source of light. I ensure the fading effect has a smooth gradation. To be successful with this background, as we saw in examples from the masters, is to keep the values even. I'll show you what I mean. Going back to my tug war drawing from earlier, as an example of an ineffective values arrangement, there's just not enough of a fade effect. Too high of a contrast, abrupt edges, which makes the eye skip around the image without a focal point. As you're inking, remember to take a step back once in a while, squint your eyes, see if anything stands out as having too much of an edge. Smooth it out by adding marks or bring the lines closer together to build the midtones. We want to convey a sense of perspective, and we achieve this by overlapping the elements. Once the leafy foreground is complete, I add in the hills. The overlapping effect is communicated by changing the line direction for each of those layers of hills. So I kept the same tone for the clusters of greenery that overlap one another. Then I went one tone lighter for the hills, then another tone lighter for the castle tower. By the way, if you're wondering, tone and value sort of mean the same thing. Value is how light or dark something is, and tone is the degree to which the value is light or dark. Essentially the same thing. I also refer back to my initial thumbnail. To stay on track with my values arrangement plan, I check the values chart before inking the next layer of textures. To create the illusion of atmospheric perspective, I used a thinner line weight than I did for the main subject. Because the treetops are in the forefront and closest to the viewer, I made that pattern denser instead of using thicker line weights there. This gives me the tonal density that I want without overemphasizing the edges. Now for the sky. We'll do a gradation similar to these examples from the Gut Pill book. For the finishing touches, I add in the billowing clouds, then use a kneaded eraser to remove the last of the underdrawing pencil lines. If you're newer to pen and ink, on the tool page of my website, you'll find the supplies you want for each stage of your projects, including a list of resources such as the Arthur Gutpill book shown in this video. Links are in the description below. I hope that you enjoyed seeing how tiny changes in planning can remarkably improve a background by first being mentally prepared for the time it takes to plan a good background, deciding on the values arrangement and textures so that you can find the best contrasting method that will emphasize your subject. There's a lot more to learn about backgrounds by studying the masters. If that sounds interesting to you, check out my Master Studies playlist. Let me know in the comments if you'd like videos on texture exercises. Give this a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next one.